new orders. In this chapter, we are going to explain about the end of blank spaces on the map, decolonization, new world orders, and three world concept. Hello, I am Shiki, and today I'm going to explain about the end of blank spaces on the map. In the early of 20th century, all of the world had been colonized and become known to Europeans. It is because there were no more blank spaces to explore, conquer, and convert. As we all know, colonialism was driven by issues of reasons and science. However, there is another factor in colonialism, which is romance. What is romance in this context? Romance is designed to satisfy the desire for adventure, danger, and excitement to the mysterious of unexplored places. As Said has explained so convincingly, the Orient provided this space of romance for Europe for centuries, but there was a feeling that by end of the 19th century, with the global reach of European colonialism achieved, that this had come to an end. In simple words, we can say that romance is the colonizer's patience to discover new places on the map. By the end of 19th century, this romance had come to a close. It is because of the end of blank spaces on the map, and it leads to a sense of loss. The end of colonial period seemed to herald a change in the world order.
Hi, I'm Zuleika. Now I'm going to explain about decolonization. Colonization relied heavily on the power of knowledge, which is the idea of knowing the natives in order to control them. Primarily, South Asia and middle-level governance of their country. Decolonization creates post-colonial national identity, which allows possibilities for diverse population to imagine themselves as a community with a common interest, history, and identity.
For example, in India, British introduced railways, maps, introduction of English as a common language of governance. English language allowed elites to communicate more easily where previously they had been hindered by the existence of different languages. However, Indian historian Pata Chatterjee had challenged this version of events. He disagreed to admit that the West is the hero of the story. The colonized society remains passive in the story because they always wait for the arrival of the colonists to develop their society and bring reason in the first place.
Chatterjee divides the social life into two categories, which are the material and the spiritual. The material, or the outer, is the public space outside the home. The economy, statecraft, science, and technology were dominated by colonizers. The spiritual, or the inner, is the private space of their home and the traditional cultures by colonized people, which were repressed during colonialism.
Those two made it possible for the colonized people to learn about superior Western techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them into their own cultures without threatening self-identity of their national culture.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'll be talking about New World Orders. So science stated that the structure of difference between the Occident and the Orient remained constant throughout the centuries he examined. However, Shohat and Stam reworked on science theory further, and they stated that in the middle of the 20th century, there's been a significant shift in the nature of Occident when USA rose as the hegemonic dominance.
My country favors a world of free and equal states. We agree with those who say that colonialism is a key issue in this assembly. But let the full facts of that issue be discussed in full. On the one hand is the fact that since the close of World War II, a worldwide Declaration of Independence has transformed nearly 1 billion people and 9 million square miles into 42 free and independent states. Less than 2% of the world's population now lives in dependent territories. I do not ignore the remaining problems of traditional colonialism which still confront this body. Those problems will be solved with patience and goodwill and determination. Within the limits of our responsibility in such matters, my country intends to be a participant and not merely an observer in the peaceful, expeditious movement of nations from the status of colonies to the partnership of equals. That continuing tide of self-determination which runs so strong has our sympathy and our support. But colonialism in its harshest forms is not only the exploitation of new nations by old, of dark skins by light, or the subjugation of the poor by the rich. My nation was once a colony, and we know what colonialism means. The exploitation and subjugation of the weak by the powerful, of the many by the few, of the governed who have given no consent to be governed, whatever their continent, their class, or their color.
As you can see from the video, the US President John F. Kennedy is very optimistic about the possibilities of having a better world. Kennedy also confidently proclaimed that the 1960s are the decade of development, where he insisted within 10 years, the differences between the level of economic development between the West and other countries could be overcome. Looking from a general point of view, this plan seemed incredibly naive and profitable. However, the decade of development is not quite what it seemed to be. USA wanted to stop colonialism in order to destroy trade relations between colonizers and colonies.
Even though US economy was growing rapidly, it remained a limited market, so in order to continue the growth, USA needed to ensure a larger market. USA wanted a global free market, at the same time ignoring any relationship between countries, which as a result have made US goods more expensive in these countries. At the end of World War II, USA had given vast amount of aids to Europe in the form of Marshall Plan. USA gave a total of $13 billion, which is equal to $130 billion now, to help stabilize European economy, so in exchange, Europeans could afford USA goods.
We have given much aid to the impoverished peoples of Europe on simple humanitarian grounds. But as a countermeasure against the attempt by the Soviet Union to communize Europe, the American people saw the necessity for cooperating with the non-communist countries in a comprehensive bipartisan European recovery program, passed by Congress and here being signed by President Truman. This program, known also as the Marshall Plan, is designed to afford eligible nations that margin of help in credit and materials which they need to bring their overall economy back to health. Secretary of State Marshall, in placing the plan before Congress, stated,
"Why must the United States carry so great a load in helping Europe? The answer is simple. The United States is the only country in the world today which has the economic power and productivity to furnish the needed assistance. The 6 1/8 billion proposed for the first 15 months is less than a single month's charge of the war. To be quite clear, this unprecedented endeavor of the new world to help the old is neither sure nor easy. It is a calculated risk. It is a difficult program. And you know far better than I do the political difficulties involved in this program. But there's no doubt whatever in my mind that if we decide to do this thing, we can do it successfully. And there's also no doubt in my mind that the whole world hangs in the balance as to what it is to be.
US industrial growth could not be maintained without dynamic markets in Europe. That is why the economy of European countries had to be rebuilt. However, at the beginning of the 21st century, such development has not happened. Instead, differences in wealth has become larger. As a summary, New World Orders consist of three things, which are the global modernity driven by capitalism rather than communism, different nature of Occidentalism as power shifts from Europe to USA, and it is also related to Cold War after World War II. Cold War was a state of political and military tension after World War II between powers in Western Bloc and powers in Eastern Bloc.
Hi, I'm Alisa. I'm going to talk about the three world concept. Post-colonial world has made everything become more complex. They changed the binary geographies into three spaces, which are the first world, the second world, and the third world. The first world, led by the USA, based around free market, political freedom, democracy, and modern technologies. The second world, led by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, has modern technology too. However, they are distorted with communist belief where their freedom is blocked, while the third world is the leftover countries.
Hopefully by now we're all savvy enough to stop saying third world countries, but saying developing nations sounds condescending too. We usually end up calling them those nations, which might be even worse. Which nations? Those nations. Over there. Don't touch them. So what should we call those nations? First off, the term third world is really wrong. It comes from the 1950s, and at the time, the first world meant countries aligned with the West or the United States. The second world was nations aligned with communist Russia. This only sort of made sense then, and makes absolutely no sense now. As for the third world, that referred to everything else. It includes those nations we mean when we say third world, but it also included places like Greenland and the United Arab Emirates. It was too general and as such not super useful. So what about the term developing nations? India, China, and Brazil are actively developing and sort of fit into that category, but people tend to call those newly industrialized countries, or they just call them India, China, and Brazil. Developing nations also include places like Syria and Somalia, but they aren't developing at all. In fact, they're spiraling. So the word developing in developing nations doesn't actually mean anything. You could say poor nations, but not if you go off their GDP. Currently, Iraq is 56th on the UN's list, and Iceland is 123rd. When you're talking about poverty, you don't usually mean Iceland. So for the last time, what should you say? Well, it's awkward and long, but you should say countries on the UN's list of least developed nations, which is a mouthful, but it's accurate. These 48 countries on the official and somewhat regularly updated list are those nations. Granted, it doesn't include all the nations people mean when they throw around those other terms, but when you're talking about world poverty, this is the place to start.
Those who studied the third world were anthropologists, and they only studied the third world once the effect of modernization had taken hold. However, for some anthropologists, it is only possible to do this in primitive society that has not had a lot of contact with other groups and have not developed or modernized. Those who studied the second world focus on the distortion created by the communist ideology in order to understand the effects that communism or socialism had on the normal operation of an economy or society. Finally, those who studied the first world were assumed to be more properly systematic to to create models and theories. Theories were generated here and proclaimed as universal.